Special presentation appearances.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this was an item that was moved by Ms. Darden, relates to the petitions for payment that were submitted by the Windsor and Carrollton Volunteer Fire Departments. The petitions were presented as a function of the board's decision to withhold paying the amounts previously appropriated as contributions pending agreement on the facility use agreement. I wanted to run real quick through these items. This whole issue started back in 2013. Back in March of 2014, we had a proposed draft facility use agreement that was presented to the departments. By June of 14, 5 of the 7 had agreed, and then moving forward from there, Windsor and Carrollton had legal representation to submit some suggested revisions, which the board had moved to not agree to at the time. Subsequently, the board had suggested a 6-month interim period time frame to try it out, kind of a trial period that was not supported by the departments. And then again, in April of this year, the board again denied some suggested revisions from the 2 departments' legal counsel at the time. In June of this year, the departments had new legal counsel submit petitions for payment of contributions to you, and over the past couple of months, those items have been presented to you and have been postponed and or considered or requested to be postponed by the departments themselves pending further negotiation between myself and their legal counsel. I am happy to report to the board today that we have reached an agreement on proposed language relative to the facility use agreement. For the board's edification and for the public's edification, I wanted to run through the changes that were done to the agreement, because obviously this is going to also require approval from the other 5 that have already signed. My belief is there should not be any real heartburn relative to the changes that were made pursuant to the negotiations, because as best as I can tell, substantively the agreement itself is the same. There are some minor clarifications and explanation language that has been included that shouldn't be objectionable to the other 5, given that they have already experienced a full year under their belt with the original version. So just to briefly run through some of those items, the first issue related to Article 5 on who had the authority on behalf of the departments to work with the county on any building alterations. The departments had originally requested back in July the inclusion of references to station chiefs, presidents, or chief operating officers. Every department has, as I understand it, has different titling for their individuals, and so this seemed reasonable to me, and so I agreed to that on behalf of the county. So that issue was off the table relatively quickly. The ground maintenance issue, the original agreement required that ground maintenance be taken up by the departments themselves. The Carrollton and Windsor departments had suggested that the county continue to be responsible for the maintenance as was originally part of the Windsor MOU, or that the county somehow reimburse them for any work that they performed. Our response to that was we would be more than happy to continue to provide the work, but we would just simply reduce the amount contributed to each individual department based on our costs. We went through a number of back and forths relative to confirmation that the other departments had indeed taken on ground maintenance activities, and that was confirmed to Windsor and Carrollton, and so therefore that item has been completed. With regards to Article 9, authorized uses, this was a sticking point relative to who had the authority to approve the activities in the particular stations themselves. Originally, we had the original facility use agreement had indicated that it would be the county's chief emergency services would be the one to determine that. the two departments had concerns about that language, so I had suggested that we try and develop some standard policies and procedures that would be followed with regards to those types of activities within the facility. There was continued concern about that as to whether or not the departments would be involved in the policy and procedure development. So at the end of the day, we simply struck any reference to any as yet undeveloped policies and procedures, and if and when they are ever developed, obviously the departments will be a part of that discussion. And I know Chief Terwilliger will certainly be involved in working with the departments on that. Obviously, the big ticket item, I guess, is the best way you can describe it, was relative to the funding issue. The two departments had requested an affirmative guarantee that once the contribution amount was appropriated by the board, that it would be dispersed. I expressed concerns relative to that, in that it would take away the board's ability to manage your funds as you deem appropriate. So having said all of that, we moved further on down the line, and relative to that funding point, which is at the very bottom of this, I proposed that we separate the funding issue from the facility use agreement provisions themselves and deal with it in a separate funding agreement, to which the departments have agreed that would be appropriate and that they would be involved in that discussion with us. And so I have, I guess, set a very aggressive date to try and have something taken care of November 1st. I'm not sitting here believing that, we can come to some resolution that quickly, but it's a hopeful November 1st. My guess would be that a more realistic date would be December 1st, but I'm going to shoot for November 1st. That's what I'm going to attempt to do on behalf of the county. So the only other point that's different on this slide that I've not necessarily covered was related to, number one, the term of the agreement. Originally, the term of the agreement had been 20 years. And the two departments had some issues relative to that and had suggested some changes. So we have agreed to an initial 1-year term with 5 3-year renewals, to include a termination of convenience provision on behalf of the departments. But obviously, if they chose to terminate the agreement, then they would not be in the station any longer. It's kind of like a standard rental agreement type thing. Also, with regards to the ground maintenance thing, we had a discussion relative to Windsor's budgetary request, which had not included any funding request for potential ground maintenance, because they had been operating under a memorandum of understanding that had the county being responsible for maintaining the grounds. The solution that we came up with, the county administrator, myself, and Mr. Terwilliger, was to offer to have the board simply appropriate to the Windsor department what our annual cost for ground maintenance of that particular facility would be. And Mr. Furlow, who's in charge of ground maintenance efforts through Parks and Rec Department, has indicated that it's a $1,200 price tag. So we are suggesting that we appropriate $1,200 for the FY15-16 budget cycle, for which Windsor, the department itself, can choose to, number one, either use the money to provide that ground maintenance on its own, whether they do it themselves or contract it out, it's completely up to them, or the county would be willing to continue to provide the ground maintenance, but then we would simply withhold the $1,200 as our costs, which was met with approval by the department from Windsor. So that is one of the keys to this resolution. The other key to this particular issue was the previously appropriated contribution. Obviously, the departments had expressed some serious concern about lack of funding, and so since this issue has come to a resolution, and since the standard has been that those departments that have signed on to a facility use agreement would be provided their funding, I have developed a proposed resolution to reappropriate last year's fiscal amount, less any expenses that we've already expended on their behalf, to those departments. Just so you know, the resolution that would reappropriate those certain funds would provide for $247,202.24 to the Carrollton Department, and that is minus from their budget request a $7,333.76 expenditure that we have already expended on their behalf for water service at that facility. And then for Windsor, they would receive the full $122,918 that was originally appropriated because we have not expended any funds on their behalf for any bills or any costs incurred. So, having said all of that, the final steps in moving forward with resolving this issue, step one is to have the petitions for contributions withdrawn. Step two would be to authorize the chairman to execute the revised facility use agreement, not only with Windsor and Carrollton, but with the other 5 departments, so that everybody has the exact same language in their agreement and no one will be perceived to be being treated any differently. Number 3 would be to authorize the chairman to execute the resolution to reappropriate the FY14-15 funds to Windsor and Carrollton. Step 4 would be authorize the chairman to adopt a resolution that would appropriate an additional $1,200 to the Windsor Department. And step 5 would be to direct me to move forward with developing a funding agreement between the county and all of the departments, not just Windsor and Carrollton. The 2 departments' legal representative, Mr. Test, is here up front. I can say that I have, it's been a pleasure working with him. Very reasonable gentleman. I certainly appreciated the conversations and discussions we've had, but I believe that he is here to make the formal withdrawal of those petitions.
When I appeared in front of you, I think for the first time in July, I had made the comment that it is always very interesting to watch democracy in action. What I observed here in July and then later in August was nothing short of drama. I'm pleased to say that it's been very easy to work with your county attorney. Pleased to say we've reached a resolution on all the points, and my client's authorized representatives have signed the facility use agreements. And as Mark has said, it's all conditioned on your approval now. So I think we've well accomplished what we set out to do. I appreciate his cooperation. I appreciate your consideration. My clients are ready to close the door on the past acrimony and move forward, and we certainly think that there will be full cooperation in the future. And with that, assuming all these steps are met, we withdraw our petitions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Test. Again, the next item then would be for the board to adopt a motion authorizing the chair to execute the revised facility use agreement with all of the departments.
So moved. Is that what you needed?
Yes, sir.
So is the board understanding, and we're in discussion now of this motion, we're looking at how many resolutions or motions here as far as to complete this?
Well, you'll need 3 separate motions, and this would be the first one.
Okay. So the first one is authorize the chairman to execute the revised facility use agreement with all the departments.
Correct.
Okay, you've heard the motion. Any discussion?
Yeah, will we have to complete step 2 before we move to step 3?
At this point, no, Mr. Jefferson. Since the 2 departments in question are the ones that are at issue relative to reappropriating and or appropriating dollars, and since they have already signed off on the agreements as they have been revised, your authorization of the chairman to execute the revised facility use agreement at this stage would allow for those reappropriations to occur and the funding to flow again, at least for those 2 departments. If there is an issue relative to the other 5, then there might be some other items that we'll have to deal with at another time. But for purposes of these 2 departments, I believe that these steps are the appropriate steps.
I'd like to ask Chief Terwilliger, if you'd come up, I've got something I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind. Thank you. To Mr. Jefferson's point, I think his point was we want the same facility use agreement for all departments. And obviously, we've got two separate ones now. So if we approve these, for these two departments, do you see any challenges with the other 5 accepting this revised facility use agreement?
I do not.
See any hiccups there? No.
No, sir.
Are you comfortable with that, Mr. Jefferson?
Okay, well, I'm comfortable with it, but if we do, I mean, we just have to work through it,
Right, right.
okay?
But the funding, restoring their funding is not contingent on the other 5 signing this agreement, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I just want to make that clear. Thank you, Mr. Chief.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Motion's on the floor. Any other discussion? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes,
Mr. Arden?
Yes.
Mr. Castine?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Chairman?
Yes.
Next item, Mr. Chairman, would be to authorize the chairman to adopt execute the resolution to reappropriate certain funds from the unassigned fund balance to the Carrollton Volunteer Fire Department and the Windsor Volunteer Fire Department.
So moved.
You've heard it. Any discussion?
just happy it's done.
Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes,
Mr. Arden?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey?
yes,
Mr. Castine?
Yes.
Chairman Long?
Yes.
Next item would be authorize the chairman to execute the resolution to appropriate certain funds from the unassigned fund balance to the Windsor Volunteer Fire Department.
so moved. I'm sorry, that's you.
All right, sir.
Motion's been made. Any discussion? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes,
Mr. Arden?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Castine?
Yes.
Chairman Long?
Yes.
And the last one, just for the record, if you would, just adopt a motion directing the county attorney to move forward with the development of a funding agreement with a
Well-
hopeful deadline of December
Well,
1st, at
no-
least.
but November the 1st give you an ample time to develop this.
Yes, sir.
It will.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't foresee that the development of a funding agreement itself would be a problem per se. Any negotiations will be in the fine print, but I mean, the concept itself has already been agreed to, at least by these two departments and by us. And so I believe that it's a doable deadline. I will certainly endeavor to put as much time and energy and effort into getting it resolved as I possibly can. And I hope that the other departments, along with the Carrollton and Windsor departments, will put as much energy into it as well. And then hopefully we can get all of this behind us and resolve it relatively quickly without dragging it out for a longer process.
But all the departments will also need to sign the funding agreement as well, so.
Yes, I
this is-
have made that clear that, if we're going to create some kind of standards relative to how funding is going to be distributed, it needs to be with everybody. Because otherwise, we're going to be right back to where we started, where some folks are treated differently than others.
No, we don't want to.
We certainly appreciate your work, Mr. Popovich, and both departments for their cooperation. And I'll make the motion that we,
Motion's been made. In discussion? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jefferson?
Yes,
Mr. Arden?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey?
yes,
Mr. Castine?
Yes.
Chairman Long?
Yes. I'd like to make a few comments now that this is over. Just one question. This immediately releases the funds to Windsor and Carrollton, is that correct?
The resolution authorizes that the funds be distributed to them, it says immediately distributed, but for all intents and purposes, practical, drafting of checks and all of going through the processes, and we've got auditors over in the office right now, so they should have their checks available for pickup or delivery, depending on whichever one they want to do, by next Friday.
And board members, you're welcome to comment on this thing. It's been a long and arduous journey for all those that have been involved, I think, in this. I think both the stations and staff, and including myself, we've all learned from this, and hopefully we can learn from this as we go forward. And I concur with Mr. Bailey's remarks. I want to thank all of those that have put so much time into coming up with an agreement that we've had tonight. Chief Acree, Chief Scott, Mr. Mitchell's been here, Chief Terwilliger, thank you for all the time you put into this. Mr. Popovich, thank you. I know you spent a lot of time. Thank you, sir, for all the time y'all put into coming to an agreement. Thank you, Ms. Seward, for all the hours you put into this. A lot of board members have done a lot of traveling. I know Ms. Darden has traveled to the departments a number of times, and I have also. I would just like to thank everybody for the time they've put into this. I think we've got a document with integrity here that will be good for both the departments and our county moving forward. And I think at this point, everybody is pretty happy we can put this behind us and move forward with the business of the county. Mr. Castine?
Congratulations to all.
Hallelujah.
Any other comments? You good?
I think a lot of, the drama was the understatement. It's been a lot of drama, been a lot of things said. I hope we can put all this behind us and move forward. And that's what we've got to do for the best for the board, for the citizens, but most of all for the departments. I know it's been stressful for everybody, but you know, we need to put this behind us and move forward and go about our business. So I thank you all for coming to the table and so that we could sit down and talk. And that's usually when something happens, it's a lack of communication. And that's what happened here. We're not pointing fingers at anybody. All of us are to blame. It happened. It hopefully will never happen again. And hopefully by November 1st, we can have an agreement that we can all live with. And again, we can move forward. We've got a new chief here, Chief Terlinger. He wants to do good work, and we need to let him have that opportunity. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Darden. If not any other comments, we'll move towards our citizens' comments time.